and that is that there is law out there, right? And then human mind is given what the capacity to what intuitively know the existence of dharma. So every child knows I don't want to be hurt, every child knows I don't want to be cheated, every child knows I don't want to be lied to, and also what others don't want the same from me, right? So now if that is the case, then the question is, then it should be very natural for people to follow dharma, right? Because everybody knows what is right, so everybody should be doing it. Then we analyzed why people don't do it in spite of knowing it, right? Why people don't follow dharma. And one of the reasons we saw is when a situation arises, they assess the situation from the standpoint of their short-term gain, right? So in some cases, if they see that by not following dharma, they see that there is a short-term gain, either money or a promotion or whatever, then they opt for what they consider to be the easy way out, okay? And they don't realize, they think that they've won. I mean, they have gained by going against dharma, okay? Now, when do you change that behavior? You only change that behavior when you begin to know what is the cost, okay? How, when you go against dharma, it's not that it just goes, that there is no cost. There is an inherent cost, and the inherent cost is in form of two different things. One is the seen result and the other one is the unseen result. Okay. Now the seen result, the cost self-esteem, and what we saw is, I don't know if we looked into it, but there is this whole thing that when I begin to speak what I know is not true, then in my vision, right, when I interact with others, others can also do the same, right? So that means that I will be what? Suspicious. Whenever people make a statement, I will not take it at a face value. I will begin to say, yeah, so is this person really speaking the truth or not? Why? Because it's me who doesn't speak the truth. It's not because that person, So therefore you begin to be suspicious, and that, imagine your interaction with the world and people if you basically have this disposition of being suspicious. You can't have and then over a period of time, basically lack of trust in the world. Okay, so many people make this generalized statement that you can't trust anyone anymore. Okay, the world is a horrible, it's a very dangerous place to live. So nowadays there are no values. So these are very, that means the person has told oneself a story that the world is not worth trusting. That you can't, the person who follows dharma suffers. So if this is the story that you have told yourself and you start believing in this story, what is going to be the nature of your interaction with the world? You can't be just straightforward good human being, because you always are looking for some meaning which are other than the obvious, right? So therefore, I'm not saying that you should just believe everyone 100%. That's not the message I'm giving, because there are people who are crooked and you should be able to recognize, right? But if your deep belief about the world in general is that it cannot be trusted, there is some problem. That you have to use your discretion when different people, your capacity to discriminate between different people is something which is very healthy, right? But you can't have an orientation which is where you have believed that the world is unfair place. Because if that is the case, what is there? Everybody is unfair, and the person who is dishonest gets ahead. So now how do you live life if your vision of the world is like that? Exactly. Extremely unhappily, right? And that means everything becomes source of suspicion. And that is something that you can't trust anyone. It's a horrible way of living. Not for others, but for yourself. Okay? So therefore, the alignment to the laws is very essential for healthy living. Okay? So that means this is a cost. The cost is too big. Starting from guilt to this overall orientation of distrust with the world. So therefore, this is something which is a cost, which is a seen cost. Then there are unseen costs, which is what we call adrushta phalam. Adrushta phalam is what the Vedas say is the result that accrues for a good action that you have done, which comes sometime in the future, not these seen results, right, is what we call punya. And the unseen result of an inappropriate action which comes sometime in the future is what we call papa. Okay? So therefore papa. So that means there is almost like an account, there's a portion, there is an immediate feedback which is given by the universe to you about the nature of your action, but there is also a long-term feedback. Okay? So that means many times, and you know, when things happen, we are unable to, sometime in the future, we don't know why it has happened to us. So at that time, because we don't know that's why we call it the unseen result. Unseen result means we are unable to connect. We are unable to say, this is what I have done and this is the result which is accruing to me, right, for whatever I have done in the past. So this is something, the fact that there is a law like that is something. Is it something that you just have to believe because Vedas are talking about it, or are there evidences? Okay? So now if you look at many things in this world, let's say the state of the environment today. Okay? Now the state of the environment today, is it the function of what we all do today or others? Exactly. So where the present day is a result of actions which were done how many years ago? Hundreds and thousands of years ago. Starting from the industrial age, the people who had engaged in manufacturing, right, and they, because of the technologies that were available to them at that given point in time, there is too much noise. Are you okay? Yeah, but also the. So it starts. Yeah, just one or two because the noise for me is too much.
I can just put the AC on low.
Sorry. It is lovely weather. It's a pity to, but it's just that it is noisy. Ah, good.
Better?
Yeah, noise level is much less. Yeah. Yeah, without the AC is fine. If you close this window, it is fine.
Sit there, next to me, ma. Back and I won't come in the view also.
Maybe they can just slightly move the chair. Oh, good. It's a So the state of environment today is a result of actions which were done hundreds of years ago, starting from the industrial age, right? that time there were no really eco-friendly technology, and the environment was so good that you didn't even have to think about it. Then over a period of time there was a certain deterioration of environment, and then you had technologies which were more eco-friendly, but at that time people had to make a choice. Sometimes eco-friendly technologies are more expensive, right? So for their short-term profit, what they use normal technologies and they make a choice. Okay? So therefore all these different choices that different people have made, it leads to the present state of environment, right? Now who puts together all these different causes starting from industrial age to now and brings the present state of environment with global warming, sea level rise, we don't put together. Who puts together? We just act.
Nature.
Exactly. We just act. We don't sit and say, okay, now there should be an ozone layer depletion. We don't do that. Please understand, we are responsible only for our actions. The results are put together by laws. Right? And that law takes into account what your actions, my actions, and everybody's actions over a period of time, and produces the state of the environment now. Okay? So therefore, the fact that Vedanta says that the results are produced by the laws is something that you can, if you observe the world, you can see that. Okay? Now, imagine that at present day we have a choice. We have a choice as to what actions we choose. Okay? Now the future is going to be determined by what? Our actions today. So nobody can say that when we talk about laws producing the result, then it is something which is predetermined. This whole idea that Indian philosophy talks about what? Karma, which is everything is predetermined, is totally not true. That means life is dynamic. Life is dynamic. What we face today is a function of the actions that we have done today and also in the past. And what we will face in the future is function of what we did in the past and what we do today. So that means you can always change, perform actions which are more responsible, and change what the future course. That is in your hand. Karmani eva adhikarahate. Anything that, future is, no, regardless of what effort I made, I can't change the future, is your conclusion. It is not true. There is a law. You have to understand there is a law. It cannot but change. Whether it changes when you want it or not is a question, because there are too many factors deciding that. But that it changes is a fact. Okay? So therefore, constantly you have to try to engage in activities. Intelligent choices you have to make. You can't, excuse yourself from that, because the laws, are not totally within you. Now, one thing which is even more intricate, and that is, even though the state of the environment on this earth is at a given level, each one of us experiences it differently. For example, when I was posted in Fiji Islands, and I was at the UN, and for Fiji Island, for the entire Pacific Island group, the biggest issue is the present day environment. Why? Because of the rise in sea level, if it continues to do so, they will submerge in the water. So the whole negotiation for them at the UN is what? Just, arrest this whole deterioration, because it actually affects their life. Now, so that means it is affecting them very differently from how it is affecting other people. So at the UN negotiation, what is very interesting is when Americans come, at times they say that the climate changes are something which are natural cycles and many people get destroyed and so many other different things. That is historical. So they said, oh, few thousand people going is something which is part of natural cycle. So they take that position is something so different. So this is what I say, the present state of environment affects different people differently and they have very different positions about it. Okay? So that means the law also what places you at that given point in time, at that given place where you go through the result in your unique way. Not only it produces the state of environment, but it also places you in different positions where you see the outcome of what is happening differently. Now, if you are living in Bombay, we also experience the deterioration in a certain way. What is the way? Air pollution. You know, nowadays in Delhi they have this odd and even because the air pollution levels are just so high, they are unsustainable. Okay, so therefore so if you are living in Bombay, we all experience a certain state of air pollution. Okay, but within that, do you think each one experiences equally? No. How you experience depends upon where you live, right? How you commute. So that means each person has to go through what the result of certain collective karma and also what your unique position in the scheme of things. If you come down to your family level, you have siblings. They have same parents. So there is some similarity in their upbringing, but each child has a totally different experience of what is going on in the house. One feels very loved, the other one may feel totally unloved. So therefore, this is the intricacy of laws. Please understand, it is so intricately woven. And it is mind-boggling. The interconnections which are, at work. And within those interconnections, your particular unique position and your particular experiences, and how then based on your present choices, how then you will be placed in some other place and your position will also change. So that is it's mind-boggling.
And that is particular to you
because of your
experience.
Exactly. That is because what you are supposed to experience as a result of your karma. So this is what we call a very complex, what we call Indra's net. Indra's net is we are all interconnected through connections that you can't even conceive. Okay? If you really look at our own lives, right? You and me meeting, 2 years ago you didn't know I existed and I didn't know you existed. Okay? And there are causes within causes within causes which make me come here and you somehow coming to know about me, and then we join together. This is something which is, it's not really, there is some choice that you made, but there are too many causes that you have absolutely, if you sit and start writing what are the causes, it's mind-boggling. You can't actually write everything. So this is the world in which you operate. So that means there is an intricate law which what gives you result. It's not a dumb law. It's too sophisticated. It connects past to the present. It connects your life from past to the present. It connects everybody else's life from the past to the present, your and my life. And also it will connect how we choose to behave today. It will what influence the future. Okay? Now imagine you live in such a sophisticated system and you conclude life is unfair because one given thing did not happen according to your expectations. how objective are you? There is this amazing reality which you miss out from your own understanding, and you create a world which is such a narrow perspective, and you keep on reinforcing that perspective with little data that you have. So therefore, Vedanta is just an opening. It's an opening into realities. When you begin to see the realities differently, what you can't but think and act differently. Because how would you act if you understand that I'm connected to everything and I'm not just a recipient but I'm also a participant, and the actions I choose today are going to affect not only me but people around me, and not only people around me, many people who I don't even know, and also posterity. Then what is going to be the nature of your action?
No choice but
Responsibility, yeah. Like I really beautiful in Rishikesh, I love that sentence when Shona said that when you really begin to understand law of karma and law of dharma, she says you have no choice but to align yourself to that. How can you not? It's too big. It's too big. Okay? And until you align, your life is not in alignment. And when your life is not in alignment, there is suffering. And if you are interested in getting rid of your suffering, you need to align. Suffering is an indication that something is amiss, something is not in its place. Okay? So therefore, understanding the fact that the results don't, that there is a law which connects the result and gives me exactly what I need and I deserve, then, but I always have a choice to undo that and create a better future for me. Makes you a dynamic person, constantly applying your creativity to say, what can I do now? Okay, so this is this is the second. The dharma is something which is universal, and it is something which is intuitively known. And we go against dharma, then we accrue results. We can't blame the law of dharma. Now, the second thing which is even more sophisticated in this whole analysis of dharma, according to the Vedic way, is even though it is universal, it is not absolute. It is, at times, it is open to interpretation. Okay? So therefore, can you think of a situation where at times you have to rethink about, it's not that there are some rules that are given and you have to blindly follow those rules. At times you have to use your discretion to do things differently. Can you think of an example?
there are different roles. You spoke about Gandhi's role as a family man, as a leader.
Yeah, exactly. So that comes in Swadharma, which is very true. But in the universal dharma, can you think that will come in Swadharma? Excellent. So can you give some examples? I gave many examples from Mahabharata.
One was when they were gambling and the priests, the Guruji sort of took the side of the Kauravas, right? And he said they were the leaders and they had to be serviced, and that was his dharma. But he did not tell them that they were really wrong by cheating and all of that. So then he was executing his dharma, but not.
Excellent.
That was the Bhishma story, right? When it said that he will be on the side of the kings, but the fact is that these kings were wrongfully kings. So he should have
Interpreted.
interpreted it differently and been on the side of the rightful kings. He just blindly followed that I will follow the king, correct? I will follow the king.
Yeah.
Even Yudhishthir gambling away Draupadi.
Wonderful. See, there are many examples where people have just followed the rule by whatever and they've gone wrong. Mahabharata is, when people ask why do you say that according to the Vedic vision that dharma is subject to interpretation, because there are a number of stories, right? The first story is that of, let's say, Bhishma. He had taken a vow that whoever is the king of Hastinapura, he will protect that king. So that means when it came to the war between Kaurava and Pandava, he felt that he was bound by the vow that he had taken, which was to protect the king. And who was the present king? Duryodhana. Okay? Now, what is the thing is, as Nandita is saying, that he could have interpreted by saying that, yes, I have taken a vow to protect the king, but if that king has become king through illegitimate means, I have no obligation to protect that king. So that interpretation is something which is very necessary. That's what makes you an intelligent person, that discretion, right? So that means you're not going against dharma, but you are seeing a bigger picture.
In the future also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Much better. Absolutely. Right? So that this whole narrow thing of, oh, I have taken this vow, so I just have to follow it, you lose a bigger picture. Okay? So that is one case. The second thing is,
even when the Pandavas got their wife Draupadi into the house and the mother hadn't seen whom they bought, and they said, oh mom, we've got something to show you, she said just share it amongst the brothers. I mean, that was something also that could have been open to.
absolutely, it is open to.
That they just shared the wine.
True. Exactly, Sapna, right? So that means that this is also this, just mom's word. It's okay, it's good to honor it, but when it doesn't make sense, you have to change it, right? So this is where your commitment to your definition of dharma becomes so strong, you miss what? The bigger picture. And that's a very good example. So please don't learn from Mahabharata by saying that, oh, you have to just blindly follow. It actually shows that you can go wrong in your decision making. Okay? Then even at the court where Draupadi was disrobed, what happened? Nobody helped, because everybody said that Yudhishthira had his free will to what? Play the game of dice or not. He used his free will and he lost everything. Now, what right do they have to intervene?
She also said he lost himself
First,
He didn't have a right. He didn't have to.
she protected herself by saying that who did, even though nobody was intervening, what she actually defended herself. And she said that who did he lose first, himself or me? And then they said he lost himself first. Then she asked a question to the court saying that if he lost, he's a slave. What right does the slave have to what? Put somebody else's life at stake? He had no right. But even though she was arguing what, nobody was listening to her. So then, who did she ask? She asked Krishna for help. Did Krishna hesitate 1 second? No. Because why? The whole thing is, you see, in Mahabharata, everybody else is shown to be, even though the person is very exalted, right? The person makes a mistake in interpretation of dharma. Krishna is presented as somebody who has the right perspective, who doesn't get, his buddhi doesn't get clouded by what? This narrow thinking. He looks at the overall thing and he does what needs to be done. So therefore, Krishna did not hesitate for a minute to protect her. Okay? He didn't have this problem by saying it is Yudhishthir's free will. She helped herself. Please understand, what do we learn from Draupadi? She was not passive. Don't think she was passive. She was a very strong woman. She helped herself by arguing and articulating what she believed in this court. When her voice was not heard, then what did she do? She asked for help. This is what we call intelligent living. You do what you can to protect yourself, and then at times there are things which are beyond your control, and there you ask for help. This is intelligent living. So,
I also remember that you're saying how you're born with certain sense of right and wrong.
yes.
I remember reading the Mahabharata as a child.
Mm.
How much Chitra Katha was.
Mm.
And I was so indignant about Draupadi.
Mm.
Not realizing, what was actually going on. Also, and I felt something was very wrong with what Kunti had told five brothers to share.
Yeah, and it's good.
Yeah.
See,
But to put it bluntly, none of their brains were working throughout for the first portion of Mahabharata. No, it's true.
It was all
But
wrong.
it's-
Even as
it's
a child,
just
I was
showing what
completely
is wrong.
story.
Exactly. I mean, everything right from the beginning till the war, no one's brains were working. I mean, for destroying
I don't know.
Kunti, Bhishma, I mean, like if she's saying as a child, you could sense that there is something fundamentally wrong with
So,
what was going
Mithali,
on.
if you begin to look at everybody's life, including your life, you will find we have no brains.
Whose brains are working?
We have really. So that means what Mahabharata shows is you have nice people out there who are exalted, but when their decision making is so clouded.
Just showing real people, right?
Exactly. This is life not about Kunti and Draupadi, it's all about all of us. Include yourself.
You get a message to your
Yeah.
it's all based
Absolutely. How many times in life we create our future and we feel we are stuck?
But why did Kunti take it back when she realized it was not chatting they were talking about? Why did she, since she knew she was in a position of such power, take it back? What did she do?
So that means so many things we say and then we, sorry?
There's a book which
Huh.
she actually knew what was going on, but she didn't want to lose control of her son. When once he had a bride, she'd lose her power over her son. So she said, divide the wife, and that way she would continue to have control of him.
See, all these we don't know. We have so many different views. But the fact is, so many times we also stick by this rigidity, right? And we say, okay, now this is what I have said, this is what has to be done, and you are just not open to other options, These are archetypes. Please understand, in psychological terms, they are called archetypes. They show us characters, and through those characters and how they make decisions, right, they show us they give us an insight about ourselves. The whole point is not to blame them and say, but it is to see how we ourselves unknowingly behave like that. Okay? When we have a choice, we tell ourselves we don't have a choice. When we actually can't do anything, we spend so much of our mental time thinking about it. All our lives are all what? We've created a world which is not at all corresponding to what is outside. We live from our own view of the world, and that is which is very absolutely
We miss the macro picture because we become
so focused, right? And here, so the most beautiful thing about Mahabharata is, this nuances, because Bhishma made that choice of protecting Duryodhana. Do we condemn him and do we call him a person who is not intelligent and he is somebody who's lost? No. He was extremely exalted person. It takes a lot to live your life by what you once you have promised to actually go through all kinds of difficulties, and in spite of difficulties stick to what you have said. It's not an ordinary person.
It can have devastating consequences.
So therefore, exactly. So that means Bhishma is exalted person, and in spite of being an exalted person, he can go wrong in his decision making. So that means this whole black and white we take away. This generally our view of the world is good people and bad people. It is divided in two categories. What is the reality? There is a lot of grey. Lots and lots and lots of grey. The same person can be extremely kind and the same person can be extremely cruel at times. These are the nuances. If you don't capture the nuances about the world, right, you don't know how to live properly. And those nuances also happen for us with reference to ourselves. Sometimes some situations evoke a very kind person in us. Some situations evoke what? A very mean, bitching person who cannot be happy with the happiness of other person, feels jealous. This is true. Nobody, you can say, categorically is a good human being at all times, and nobody, you can say, is a categorically bad person at all times. This is a fact. Sometimes when we operate from a certain wisdom, we are all good people, good human beings. Sometimes there is some experiences of ours which we have given some meaning, and we interpret what? Something which is happening inappropriately, and we act very inappropriately. And we convince ourselves that the cause is out there. Okay? So therefore, whole Mahabharata teaches us to become more refined in our analysis of characters, of people, of not those people, but also what? The present contemporary people, and also including ourselves. Include yourself in it.
I think what you said, that we convince ourselves that we don't have a choice, and often we
Have a choice.
That's really important, because it's so common. We actually just do convince ourselves that, okay, well, we can't act, we don't have a choice, we just have to deal with it.
Absolutely.
We have to bear this or whatever.
Absolutely. And where you actually don't have control, you constantly try to change that also. So I like the fact that Nandita, when I was giving this GMAT scenario, you said, did they ask about certain facts which are important to that decision, but they are beyond your control? Very important.
Actually, when they say that I haven't had a choice, they've already made that choice by not taking the other choice.
Absolutely.
They have made that choice of being found.
Like your Mahabharata example, where before that whole game of dice, he could have just said, I'm not coming. Yudhishthira knew that they were cheaters.
Exactly.
He just felt that the law of Dharma said one thing for him, he had to come. But he had a choice. He could have said that cheaters.
But the
Absolutely.
worst was the second time when he agreed to the game of dice. After
Yes.
losing his kingdom, he gave back his kingdom, and then again he agreed to the game of dice.
So this
Like,
is
you know,
where-
which is what was not making sense at all, because you were really like.
So you know, that's
One thing must explain that.
see that is what sometimes our reason, our clarity is so clouded. Good human beings, please understand, good human beings can sometimes be so clouded.
But not after such a
No, but he
huge.
thinks he's
But
doing the right thing. He's convinced
he-
that this is Dharma.
This is Dharma,
I have to
absolutely.
I cannot say no, that's the law of Dharma which he should do. When he did,
See, this is where
he really could interpret it or make a choice.
But then how are things wise?
Sometimes don't you have to take the altruistic way in order to benefit the bigger picture?
so that's exactly what we are saying, that we can't just go by narrow rules. You have to look at the bigger picture, and you have to make the decision which looks at the bigger picture. So this is where the need for interpretation of dharma. But the minute you start talking about the need for interpretation, what happens is most of the time people use it as an escape. They interpret, for example, I don't want to pay taxes because why? Oh yeah, nobody pays taxes anyway. So here, so that means then if it is subject to interpretation, you have to ask yourself, what is the criteria for that interpretation? How do I make sure that my interpretation is not just for my personal benefit, but it is for really altruistic and something which is looking at the larger picture? That also is your responsibility. So living a life of dharma according to this whole vision is a big responsibility. You need to understand many things to be able to live effectively. Right? So therefore, what is the criteria? Your discretion, but how do you then use your discretion The one thing is the larger good. Okay. What is the other thing? The nuances of the situation. You need to capture the nuances of the situations accurately and make the decision, whatever is in the best interest of everyone. The third thing is practicality. Okay? There are some ideal solutions that you come up with which are totally unimplementable.
Yeah, I mean, continuously you're facing this. For example, oh, I don't drive. Yeah. Then if you want to get a license and you're not going to drive, you sit in Malayalam and you don't drive and you won't get it.
Absolutely.
So, again.
So therefore, exactly, so that some amount of practicality has to set in, because this is why a lot of times to my teacher, big businessmen, they used to ask what Krishna is saying. She's saying that, when you work in a corrupt country where every license is going to cost some money, then what do? You don't do business, or, if you want to do business, this is something that you have to do. So my teacher used to be very practical. He says, I can't sit and give you this message that don't do business, because what? You can't do anything like that, right? Find a company, and this is what Krishna is saying is so important. I knew some consultants in France, and they are personal consultants, right? And they are what they call business ethics consultants. And they give to big CEOs, they give a message that if your company is doing something wrong, and if you participate and you do what, you go along with it, you are following adharma. So that means it's your moral obligation to what? Leave that company, and then this is what it's because you are actually participating in something wrong. And I was actually quite shocked, because I said, find a company who is doing everything exactly according to law, and the whole world will be unemployed. So therefore, it's true that we have to work within systems, and that's why we have a kind of a method where here, if you have done that, what we call prayashchitta karma, you know that you had to bend, to in order to just survive. Now you do a charity to offset what the effect of this inappropriate action. So that means there are specific what we call prayashchitta karma. Prayashchitta karma is, it's impossible for us to live just like exactly aligned to dharma. There are because at times the external situations don't allow for us to just have a total alignment. But if you are aware that you have gone away, then you compensate by what? It's like, if you have uprooted, these are the principles that we use now, what for construction of something. If you have destroyed a tree, you go and plant 10 more. At least one will survive, so you have offset. So this offsetting mechanism is also there in our whole thing, because it also is understood that 100% of alignment is also not possible. It's so intelligent, but because 100% alignment is not possible, you can't then say, oh, let me just do what I want. You have to be as close to dharma as possible, because if you are not, there is a cost.
Yeah, just exactly what you were saying, and then also just before that you said, then you can't use that as an excuse. Continuously do bad things.
Absolutely. Yes.
Keep saying, I'm doing
Yes.
bad,
Yes. Absolutely. So, yeah. So there again, that's all. This is nuance, right? Because every information, you can either use it or you can abuse it. And that is entirely up to you, because you can work yourself to justify everything wrong, and then you can, So that's why living a life of responsibility, please see, it's for yourself. It's not for pleasing somebody else. Because you may justify, but the laws are too smart. You can't fool the laws. Laws will give you the result. And that's why, let's say, two people have done the same action, one has been very deliberate, the other one has accidentally do it. Do you think that both accrue the same result? No. So that means the law of dharma, they capture all these different intentions. They capture intentions, they capture actions, they capture the context, the situation, the nuances, they capture everything. And they give you just the right result, which is, it is amazing. It's mind-boggling. So through your actions, you just have to, that whole alignment is something which is just beautiful, because the more you align, more you will see how easy your life will become. You will see over a period of time.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So I actually see the Mahabharata as a story.
Yes.
So not as reality, that it didn't actually happen. Right?
Yes.
But it's a master story because it uses what you all have brought up, which is the weakness of people. And if they weren't realistically weak people, there would be nothing to discuss. If they were perfect, and you can't relate to them unless they are weak. And I think the whole front half of the Mahabharata sets up the issue of Arjuna making this decision to go to war.
Yeah, absolutely. Those weaknesses are not only out there, they are within us.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why we relate. And we can see how different characters are, somebody can be very strong in one, but can be very weak in the other. And we all find ourselves like that, You can be very clear and very lucid with reference to some points, and some are your weak, vulnerable areas, and there you just lose your clarity.
But human fallibility is a fact of life.
Absolutely.
We want, let us then be gods and goddesses. Right?
Absolutely. But human fallibility is, but you can't just be content with that. So the whole life is to then, to make it as less as possible, and guide your life by wisdom, as much wisdom as possible. Right. So therefore, this is what we call the nuances of dharma. Okay. Now the second thing, it is subject to interpretation, and you have to use your discretion, right? And that choice that you make has to be guided by different criteria than just your personal self-interest. Now the second thing, that the dharma according to this Vedic vision is not just what we call Samanya Dharma, the universal ethical value. There is a second category of dharma, and that is called Swadharma. Swadharma is a different concept. It means your own duties and responsibilities, because each one is placed differently in this grand scheme of things. In this interconnected world, you find your unique position, and that position is only your position. It's not my position. Your skills, your talents, your resources, yours are very different from mine. Mine is different from yours. So that means there is, along with that position comes duties and responsibilities. So therefore, how do you know that the minute you say you have duties and responsibilities, people ask, how do you know what is my responsibility and what is my duty? Okay? So there are different frameworks which are given, and the first framework is, we call Varna and Ashrama Dharma. Ashrama Dharma is the stage of life that you have. So when you are a student, which is called Brahmacharya Ashram, you have different duties and responsibilities, Ashrama Dharma. Okay? So when you are a child, what is your dharma?
To study hard and to learn.
To learn. Absolutely. To learn is your dharma. And in that learning, there is both learning, the IQ and EQ. We generally ignore one over the other, but that learning has to, the parents have to ensure that that learning is both. Okay? Not just the cognitive intelligence, but emotional maturity is something. As you progress in life, most of the time you ask CEOs of the companies what kind of work they are doing. It's all people related, lot of it. The technical is what? At the middle management level, they are all what? Technical people who are very, very savvy with whatever they have learned. At the top management level, it's a different role altogether. Okay? EQ is something which is so critical. We just give so much emphasis on IQ coming first, right? Always scoring, and that is the only thing we look. So that learning is something that there are few things that we have to keep in mind, and that I'm just going to share. I don't know, you are a neuroscientist? Okay, wonderful. So maybe you can tell me whether it is true or not. Because I recently had a retreat in one place, and there is a doctor who's a neonatologist. Okay? And there was another participant who had come from the US, and she has a little grandchild, and this when they were talking, she was saying that you know what, I don't make my child watch all these cartoons, grandchild watch all these cartoons and all. I just show educational videos when the child is eating. Okay, so now this neonatologist, she told her, this is the worst thing that you can do, because as a child, when you're too young, your brain is not well developed to be able to process two different things at the same time. So eating time is an eating time. You can't be distracted with something else. Okay? So doing two things simultaneously at a very young age is bad idea. Then she said, now you can tell me, because you are the perfect person in front of whom I have to say. Then she said that when you watch a movie, what happens, or TV or whatever, the frame keeps changing. Okay? So for an adult, you have enough time to process what has happened and then move on to the next, whatever is happening, next scene. But you see, the child brain at a very young age is not developed enough to process that. By the time it's processing the data, the frame has changed. Then there is some confusion, then the third frame comes. She says that now what you are doing is making the child eat and look, and within that looking, constant change of frame, and that confuses the child. And she says many children who are exposed to early TV develop what? Attention deficit disorder. Is it true?
I would take it with a pinch of salt.
Okay.
Because I think children from very, very young age, even when they're 2 weeks old,
Yeah.
they tend to focus on motion. That's the way our brain is
working. But isn't it
brain
too much?
Actually doesn't focus. The neurons don't react if the stimulus is not moving. It reacts much more heavily when the stimulus is moving. So movement and the detection of movement is inbuilt in our brains.
But giving the meaning to it and building a story at very young age, is it?
Moving all the time.
So there is no. But see, moving people is not a story behind. But I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there are certain methods which may not be so healthy, and we kind of expose our kids to doing certain things which may not be healthy. Okay, so learning also has to follow a certain method, and one has to be sensitive. Okay. Now the second thing is, the second ashram we get into is Grahastha ashram. Grahastha ashram is what? When you get married and then you begin to start your own life. You start your own working, you start your own family, you have your own kids. Then in that stage of life, you are playing the maximum role. because you are an adult, you have learnt, and now you have to what? Start living your life. And you play, Swadharma is, you play different roles. With reference to your spouse, you are what? Husband or wife. With reference to your kids, you play a role of a parent. With reference to your own parents, now you have grown up and you play role of a child, but not just a small child who needs help, but you actually have to begin to contribute to them. It's a different role. During brahmacharya, the parents, they give you all the support, and grahastha is the time that you actually reverse it. Absolutely. So within the same role, the script has changed. Then you go to work and you play a role of what? An employee, an employer, a colleague, everything. Okay? Then you have friends and you play role with reference to your friends. So these are several roles that we all play. These are all our Swadharma. Every role has a script, appropriate script. Okay? Now, what is the if you don't understand Swadharma, then what is the problem? You don't understand that I have obligation to play certain roles, and each role carries a very unique responsibility, and even within a role the responsibilities change. When you start working, when you just enter a company, your roles and responsibilities are very different than when you are in middle management or when you become the top management. So that means that if you don't recognize different roles and try to see at this given point in time what is called for to play this role appropriately, then you create a confusion. So that means Swadharma means that each one I have to recognize at this given point in time what needs to be done and do what needs to be done. Okay. Now kids, it's exactly the same. When the kids are 2 years old and when the kids are 15 years old, you can't behave the same. You have to change how you behave. Okay. So that lack of lucidity of what is called for in this role at this given point in time is something that we all suffer from. The second thing which Vedanta says is, you are playing many different roles. Who are you? You are a multifaceted human being. You are essentially much more than any role that you play. The problem is we get totally lost in the role. This particular thing is very nicely depicted through a story. The story is, you go and see a play and there is an actor. The actor is playing role of a beggar. Okay. Now imagine, when the actor is playing role of a beggar, the actor knows the very fact that I'm independent of being the beggar. But that independence, does it mean that he just doesn't play the role seriously? He will play it well. And if he plays it well, he will act really as what? Yeah. He will really make you feel, he will evoke all kinds of emotions of compassion, empathy, everything. But while all that is happening, exactly, while all that is happening, what happens? He knows, what does he know? That I'm more than that role. That exactly. So that means that this is a role for the moment I'm playing it, and then I do it really well, but there is a cognitive distance that I have, which is a real distance between the actor and the role. What is the relationship? The role cannot be without an actor, but actor is not what? Actor is much more than a role. Actor is free from that role that for that time the person takes up. Now imagine if the actor started thinking that I'm the beggar, what would happen? You will call that person loony, because you've lost that cognitive distance, a distance which is really there, you have lost it. So now, when we don't understand that, every role, right, is taken to be my intrinsic nature, where actually I am just assuming different roles and I am essentially free from every role that I play. Okay. Now, when there is a challenge in one role, generally what happens is we don't even define ourselves as playing many different roles. So, if there is a problem in one role, see for example, I go to work and I have a problem with my boss, then for me, 95% of my mental life is caught with what? That friction, and playing that friction in my mind. So when that is capturing all my attention, then when I'm playing another role, am I totally available to play that role? No. Why? Because my mental life is totally preoccupied with that particular problem that I have there. So that means that my mind is not available at that given point in time fresh to play that role. That's why we have a clouded mind. Clouded mind where we are carrying problems and we define ourselves by what? That problem. What is the reality? In that given role, among many different roles, I have an issue. That is a fact. But in my understanding, that becomes what?
The definition of me.
The definition of you. And then we just find ourselves lost. So therefore, putting everything in perspective, without denying the problem, localizing the problem is something which is extremely important. Say here in this relationship, in this context, but that doesn't mean that you have a huge problem which is worth what? 95% of your mental time. Then that gives you a perspective with reference to yourself and with reference to that problem that you're facing. The whole life is about putting things in perspective without denying it. Just because it has that position, we are not denying it, but we are giving it a its due place, and not exaggerating its importance.
But now we also play so many different roles there of parallel.
Absolutely.
Sometimes when you say that you have to then look at the context, know you're bigger than the role, it's very, very hard to make those choices in the different roles that you're playing, that what is it that you should be doing at that particular.
So that's why we lose lucidity, right? Because so much information is mixed up. And the second thing that happens is, what Nandita is saying is that, there are different roles that I play, and if I'm not conscious about different roles and different responsibilities that go with each role, then there is what we call the mix-up, spillover. The spillover is the biggest problem. Okay, so I had a friend whose brother, she said she's divorcing his wife. So I said, what happened? So she said that my brother is a captain in a ship. So when they go, he's the captain. That means what? Everybody does exactly what he says. And for that role, it's appropriate because out there, his decisions, he's responsible. And whatever he says is going to affect the lives and everything. So he is in charge. But when he comes home, he starts behaving exactly, he just wants to order everyone around and make people do exactly as what. And imagine, wife of this person, how would she feel? It's a different role. In that role, it's an appropriate behavior. It's required. As a captain, you have to make those decisions and you're in charge. But when you come home, you're playing a different role, and that role is that of a husband. And that role has a different script. if you continue to be this authoritative person who just wants to order people around, it's a disaster in terms of when it comes to your marriage.
But you must
So
not be conscious of it.
exactly. So that means when you are studying Vedanta, you are made conscious of so many things that you generally are not aware of. Lot of our irresponsible behavior is because of lack of self-awareness. That's why when you are told about these characters, it gives, the purpose is not to criticize them. The purpose is to what? It's a window to yourself and fine-tune your own thinking.
But Nima, sometimes it's a thing that all of us probably face all the time. When it's your two roles parallel and you're trying to figure out what is the more important role that should be at play at a particular given time. Right? And so what is your appropriate behavior? Like I'll give you a real example of say tomorrow. And I'm sure all of us have faced this. I have a really important work where there's a walk cross for India proposal and I have to do a chanting. That's one. At exactly the same time, I'm on the PTA, there's a PTA handover committee meeting.
What is PTA?
The parents teachers. There's a handover meeting at exactly the same time where various people are coming together for that handover, one committee to another. Both are roles that you play. Both are important and both involve multiple people, and if you ditch one or ditch the other, both are not right. And I'm sure many of us face the same situation where parallelly you're playing different roles.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
true.
that choice is really, really hard. Like how do you make that choice?
No, that's true. So that's why I think, I can't sit and give, but this is exactly, we also say, you're right. You're a CEO of a company and you have an important meeting and your child is performing, or your child is performing somewhere and she really wants you to come. Right? So that means you constantly have to make those choices. And I can't sit here and tell you you should do this or you should do that, right? It's you have to decide, because you have to weigh the importance of that particular meeting. Because the meetings, could be very different at different times. And then what the importance of your being present for your child's whatever. Okay? Now, many times what happens is we end up choosing, let's say I choose that at this meeting I have 4 crore whatever deal or whatever, and I want to do. What happens is we don't sit and explain to our kids. When you make that choice, you may be forced to make that choice, and at times you have to make that choice, but what you can do is what? Explain. You can sit with this person and say, this is the situation. We don't do that enough. Right? So that means the child feels not loved. The child feels ignored. The perception of the child is, then you blame the child, my child feels like that, because there is a lack of communication. See, many times you have to make a choice, and those choices are not that easy. And it's not that one time you choose office means every time you have to choose office. Sometimes you have to choose this, sometimes you have to choose that. The whole thing is about discretion, and you have to decide. But if you have made choice of one over the other, you have to communicate to whatever that other is. And you have to say what you have to say. That lack of communication most of the time is the biggest problem. When you begin to explain your position, you think your child will not understand. The child understands very well. Right? So therefore, a lot of the times, it's true that there are choices which are not easy. That's why you are studying this. So when you have to play two different roles, there is what conflicting sometimes obligations. But whatever choice you make, you have to communicate to the other party. And this is exactly what, when you become more and more, this multiple role is a very good thing. Besides that spillover, this multiple role and conflicts within the role is something that we saw. I think I talked about it in this class with reference to what Mahatma Gandhi. He had started what Swadeshi movement, because he saw that the only way to fight the British, they didn't have enough weapons or anything, is to what?
non-violent.
Non-violent way, how would you fight? What is the mechanism? What is the tool that you have?
Your will.
The only thing that you have is what the British people were minting money. They were sourcing the raw materials from here. They were producing goods and they were selling it back, and they were earning a lot of money. So he started what? Break the whole economy, the whole source of income by starting Swadeshi movement. Very clever, very intelligent. He was not passive. Non-violence doesn't mean passive. He says they break that whole backbone of the British Empire, which is what they earned so much from this colony. Break it by encouraging people to buy things which are made, khadi, made in India, and boycott everything foreign. During the same time, his own son wanted to go to England and become a barrister. Now, Gandhi had to make a choice. He says, to the nation, I'm giving a message. What is the message? Boycott everything foreign, Swadeshi. And if my own son wants to go and study in England, what is going to be the credibility of my voice, my request to the nation, if I myself send my own son to the UK? You have to make a choice. There are two role of a national leader and role of a father. Natural conflict, legitimate conflict. What did he choose? He didn't allow his son to go and study in the UK, because that was a bigger cause. Now, where he probably, we don't know. We are not here to judge him or to say he was wrong or anything. But when you make a choice, and when this person feels that the pain of that decision, exactly, understand, and we do it, we don't spend enough time talking to that other person who perceives oneself as a loser. So that means
justifying yourself is again very difficult, because it becomes, another person sees it as justifying.
Other person sees is other person's problem. What you have to do is what you have to do. You have to learn to communicate. If you start by saying other person will not understand, you are starting with what? A wrong assumption in the first place. Without trying, you say the other person will not understand. That is how we deny ourselves all the different things, right? We assume without trying. Okay.
No, but his son must have still felt resentment.
Yeah, he may. He absolutely.
There is a, like you say, cause and effect.
Fact. That's true.
Everything correct.
Yes. Yeah.
The son is another entity with his own genes. his own
Absolutely.
beliefs,
Absolutely.
his own values.
Yes. That's why the thing is that you can't. This is why total alignment is not. Is complex. This is what the whole. The Vedic vision captures the complexity. That's why it is so beautiful. It doesn't just tell you, yeah, follow these 10 rules and then, then otherwise you will be condemned. It captures all the nuances, all the complexities, all the, difficulties, and then shows you. But in spite of this, you constantly have to strive to make your decisions which are with dharma. That's what makes life challenging. If everything was too easy and too obvious, then what is the use of your intellect? The very fact that there are, the puzzles, why do they capture kids? It challenges. It will engage them. If everything is already done, there is nothing else to be done. But they have to figure out things is what life is. It's lovely, because it helps you to figure out things and figure out better and better and better. And you have to strive for it. This is the whole meaning of life. Otherwise what? You've created positions which are inaccurate. You have, created the view of the world which is inaccurate. You have a self-image of yourself which is inaccurate. And you take it all as real, and you just continue to act. what is going to be quality of your life? All your pictures are inaccurate and you have believed them to be right, and you say there is no other way, and you just continue. Right? The human growth is this brain that you are given is an extraordinary instrument. It can capture all these different things, but you have to choose to expose yourself to this teaching, and you have to what? When situations arise, you have to bring in the relevant information and you have to what? Use it. Dharma, living life of dharma is you have to be extremely refined person to interpret everything correctly and do what needs to be done. Very intelligently navigation. Okay. And what is the culmination of your free will? The culmination of your free will, the use of the free will is when the third aspect, one is the samanya dharma, the second is swadharma, and the third is lokasangraha. Culmination of your free will is really when you begin to be a contributor. We all have, along with what is very interesting is, along with this understanding of what is right and what is wrong, human brain is also programmed in a way, naturally programmed in a way that you will guard your self-interest. This is a natural program. You can't nobody can claim there is no such thing which is what we call selfless. Upanishads make the statement, Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Anything that you like in this world is what you like. Why? Because it pleases you. You like your parents because they please you. You like your kids because they please you. You like your spouse because they please you. The minute they start displeasing you, what happens? Divorce. Everybody you like because what?
Serve your purpose.
Because there is this self-interest you cannot eliminate. You cannot. Because it's part of human program. Please understand.
Even if not directly, via.
Via. Exactly. Always. So that means if there is a true Vedanta teacher, they will never tell you, oh, be selfless. That is not the right message. The message is what? Have enlightened self-interest. What is enlightened self-interest? A narrowly defined self-interest is what?
Just yourself.
Just yourself. Grab. It's a grabbing mentality. Selfish. That is what we call the instinct. The instinct is what? Just selfish, grab as much as possible, narrowly define me, my husband, my kids, and accumulate as much as possible.
So it's like that mamaka thing.
Exactly. It is that mamaka thing that I was talking about. The Duryodhana is an archetype of what? Not an enlightened self-interest. It is narrowly defined self-interest. The Arjuna is what? An archetype of a self-enlightened what? Enlightened self-interest. Because his mamaka included who?
People around him.
Not only his own brothers, his friends, his cousins, the villagers, the wives, it included everyone. That means there was expansion. That he was still doing it, though he don't think he was doing it as what the self. It was not a selfless. It was an enlightened self-interest.
So not because I love these people so much, but how will I then be a good king if I am a king over just widows and children?
Absolutely.
It was self-interest.
And also that, if they suffer, right, I can't be indifferent to it. I also suffer because there is a whole mechanism called empathy. Empathy, as I told you, that there are mirror neurons. I think I explained to you. There is a circuit which makes you recognize your own pain, but there is also a mechanism where I can recognize your pain and actually feel the pain through mirror neurons. So that means I'm not comfortable with your pain. And for removing that discomfort, I am helping you, and that is something what it is. So that means, imagine, look at this. Generally, when we have a narrowly defined self-interest, when we see somebody as having more than us, it evokes what? Jealousy in us. We feel small, we feel that person has whatever the clothes or the figure or the jewelry or house or whatever you fancy, job, whatever, right? And then you feel small and you feel jealous. Now that is what narrowly defined self-interest. Now if you begin to see that, hey, that is a beauty and that's a lovely thing to have in the world. You need people who are more beautiful than me and have more resources than me. What's wrong? Okay, so that means by defining your happiness by what? Happiness of others, you become what?
Expanded.
You expand. So that person's promotion doesn't make me feel small. That person is progressing, it should make me what? Happy. Or if I begin to pray for the prayer is an amazing thing. If I begin to pray for the well-being of others, I have really grown as a human being, because I define my well-being as what? Well-being of others, instead of what? That my well-being is not in making others small, my well-being is in making people big and grow. That person is, it's an amazing person. That person is what we can call a saint. To this person people come. People come because people feel what? Not threatened by the presence of that person. And they ask for help when they need help, because you know that that person is not indifferent to your well-being. That is huge. To evolve, to use your free will like that is a culmination of your maturity. You come in another league of people. You are not an ordinary human being then. You stand out.
Very important. The journey, of course, to reach that is a long and complicated one, but very important to inculcate this small little thought in children. We live in a very aggressive world where everybody is just tearing other people down. And if we keep continuing to tell them to see this part of it, where people have something to offer, and people are good, and people are this and that, then you at least give them some sort of light at the end of a tunnel.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and your happiness is what? Connected to somebody else's happiness. That is something, so that means you are making that person happy not just for himself but also for yourself, because your happiness is connected.
As like if a family member sad, you don't
Yeah.
want to make it happen because you also feel
Feel.
the pain of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
God.
So now the more you expand that range and say any human being, right, that my well-being is not just connected to 5 people in my life, it is connected to, through these laws. Yeah, through these laws there is so much interconnection. The more I extend, there is more what's enlightened self-interest. Because my happiness is not only just connected to 5 people, but 50, 100, or the whole humanity. That's why we learn to pray. There are prayers in Vedic thing where you pray for the well-being of everyone. You don't even know who are the people, but you pray. You send your intention. genuinely mean what? Well for them. That is a transformation. You stop becoming, at least you are changing your intention, right? That means in your awareness of well-being, you have included who? Like Arjuna. You have included, you are expanding. Exactly. You are subconsciously expanding your mind. And changing this self-interest, which is generally tends to be very narrowly defined, you are giving it another dimension altogether. So this is how far the free will, the use of free will can go. Samanya dharma, swadharma and loka sangraha. This is sangraha. And this is what we call meaningful life. Otherwise, all this big picture that you hear about Atma and all is just not going. When the foundation is not right, it is all just some fairy tale like story. That I'm limitless and this and that. Doesn't take roots in your being. You need, the foundation has to be dharma.
The laws, isn't that for any parallel laws, or the law, the laws we keep talking about?
Yeah. So that means in Samatvam Yoga Uchyate, I will talk about laws. In the next verse, very good, Tushna. The laws that I have been talking about up to now, I have been talking about dharma. Dharma is your this ethics, and then how we use this understanding of ethics to guide our decision making. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about laws and how they operate. So that is the next verse, which is the verse which I skipped, which was 48, the previous verse, which I said I'll do later, because I did, this was 12 and now we'll do 11. Next time I will do 11.
You said when you were talking just before you talked about the different types like ashram, dharma, and you said something called varna. What do you
Varna is your particular in Vedic thing. There is something called there are 4 different types of people. One are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. So these are not, when in the British, like when you go and study Hindu, whatever in, let's say Columbia or Harvard or whatever, they talk about this casteism and they have all these very pet words. But here the idea is different. So that's a good question. I will talk about what is this idea about Varna Dharma. I will talk about it. Okay, because you must know what is the original idea. Then yes, there are distortions and all, and people have misunderstood for many years and they've made it into some kind of a rigid system, but you must understand what is the original idea. That I will explain next time.
So if you introduce it in this context, then according to your Varna, your Dharma is different.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have a different role to play in the society. Yeah, that's a good question, Nandita. Okay, I'll stop here. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.